Hello guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm here with the Hangover Queen and I'm here with Chris. So do you want to talk about a little bit what we're doing, Chris, today?
Worse.
Today we're all supporting Michaela as she struggles through the holidays.
Get my name right. You guys are the worst. Pop it off.
Very supportive co-hosts we are.
So supportive.
Aside from the joy we're having with this, we have a really cool interview with Holly Garrod today. Holly's a really awesome ornithologist and bird bander. A lot of experience working South America, Central America, the United States, really, many different parts of the world. And we had a chance to speak to her, I guess it was a few weeks ago now, about the work she's doing across the world, and with a lot of focus on the work she's doing right now in the Caribbean. And it was a really awesome interview. Probably one of the, not to rank them, but probably one of the most interesting scientifically interviews we've done so far. So,
No, it was amazing. It was really fun.
Fantastic. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it was very informative, and I got to learn a lot more about birds. Just I don't really know much about birds, so
It was good. It was really
so that was nice.
Yeah, so I guess we might as well go ahead and give it a go, and we'll chat about it at the end.
This week is Holly Garrod. She's an ornithologist with lots of experience across all of the Americas, especially Caribbean and South America. So thanks for joining us this week, Holly.
Cool. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Yeah. So again, how we usually do this is just going to ask you to give some background about, your work, where you've worked, what you're doing, just anything you want to talk about your career, interesting projects you're working on now or have worked on. And we'll just go from there with some questions before we get to your stories. Go for it.
Cool. Sounds great. Well, my background, so actually I kind of I've been a birder since I was a kid, since I was about 8 years old. And then I got into the neotropics on one of my first field jobs in Dominican Republic. And I ended up going back to Dominican Republic to do my master's thesis studying the Hispaniola and toadies, which are two really adorable small green birds related to kingfishers. Definitely recommend looking those up if you don't know what they are. But then I just kind of got hooked on the neotropics, and I ended up living in Ecuador for about a year, working on and running a bird observatory called the Hamacoake Bird Observatory. And then I ran the Costa Rica Bird Observatories program for about a year and a half and lived in Costa Rica for almost 3 years. And currently I'm working with Birds Caribbean, and I kind of came back to my Caribbean roots or my Caribbean start, I should say. And I am now managing the bird banding program for Birds Caribbean. So we are working to kind of unite bird banding efforts throughout the Caribbean. So we've created our own band schema. We give bands to people, and then we support local trainings for biologists to try to help biologists kind of run their own programs on their different islands. And then we also just try to create a community of bird banders throughout the Caribbean, which is pretty cool. So
that's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I mean, obviously that's kind of how we know each other and have met, is through our mutual interest in bird banding. So you can imagine I would have some questions about bird banding in the Caribbean. How big is it? I mean, I guess you're trying to get it started, but how much is happening on the different islands? Is it really localized, or is there actual data being collected in different islands, in different countries?
That's a great question. So what's really cool is it's been fairly scattered. There hasn't been a lot going on. Cuba actually is really leading the way. They've been bird banding there for at least 30 years, and they have 4 or 5, I think now, different stations around the country, most of which is done with Bioeco and the Caribbean Biological Corridor, the CBC. So they're kind of leading the way, and because of also the kind of the history between the U.S. and Cuba, they haven't had a lot of access to kind of U.S. resources. So a lot of their stuff, including banding gear and bands, have all kind of come from Europe. And so, but then the rest of the Caribbean has had more access to that. So it's been this really interesting mix of trying to kind of get everyone on the same page and integrate everyone. So and what's interesting too is Cuba's really been leading the way, because they've been banding for the longest, and they've kind of had the most established programs. Last year we went and did a bird banding workshop, which was really cool. It kind of brought people from all over Cuba down to the Goonlock station in Siboney, down in the southeast part of the country, which was really neat. And then, so aside from Cuba, there's a group that's been banding in Trinidad for a while, for the last 20 years. They did a workshop there a while ago, and then now actually this awesome lady, Giselle, and her husband have kind of taken over the project, and they were just part of one of our workshops. And I'm really excited to see them kind of take that over. And there's another lady, Davika, in Tobago. So they're working together to kind of form a Trinidad and Tobago Bird Observatory, which I think is going to be really cool. And then there's Ann Sutton, who does some work in Jamaica. I've done some work in Dominican Republic, like I mentioned, but there honestly hasn't really been any consistent bird banding there. It's just kind of been scattered projects. So that was kind of one of my goals, is to start a more established bird banding station there. And then otherwise, it's mostly just been like small projects. Like Puerto Rico they had a long-term study that's been going on since the 80s, I believe, that in Guanica, in the southwest part of the country, that was run by Joe Wonderly. And now it's currently being run by Judith Toms. And that was it was this really cool, they've been studying kind of like how both resident and migratory birds do, especially with regard to hurricanes. So that was a pretty cool long-term study. But now it's unfortunately it's not being run this year, so we're kind of trying to figure out the future of that project. So yeah, it's interesting because in the Caribbean sorry for my long-winded answer, but it's been very scattered. And yeah, it's so, since it's been very scattered, but then it's also like that you have these kind of like small projects that have been going on for a long time. And then of course in the Bahamas there's been some stuff with the Kirtland's warbler, but a lot of it has been more species specific. But so it kind of this was kind of like the time to start being like, okay, well, there's not a ton of people doing work, but enough people doing work, like let's all kind of like, excuse the bad pun, band together and like get us all kind of on the same page for banding in the Caribbean.
Oh, well, that's really great. I'm curious. So obviously you're saying it's like an ever-growing thing that's happening in the Caribbean in general. What type of work is being done? So I know I was with Chris for a little bit in the summer, and there was point and bird banding. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're actually doing when you're in these places, or what the work that's being done there as well?
Yeah, so I guess what's really cool about Birds Caribbean is they're a group that's really all about like empowering local conservation organizations in the Caribbean. And so they've currently done a lot of work with seabird censuses and waterbird censuses, and kind of and shorebirds as well. So a lot of just kind of more water birds in general. But to date, we really haven't had much of an organized effort for land birds. So that's kind of what we decided to do. So actually during COVID, we wrote a Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act grant, so some money from the US, and we decided that would be really cool to kind of start this land bird monitoring program. So the idea being to kind of take like a 3-tiered approach where we would kind of organize land bird monitoring efforts in the Caribbean, land birds being everything that's not water birds essentially. So I of course am like mostly passerine based and passerine biased. But then, of course, with land birds, we want to include parrots, raptors, just honestly like anything that's kind of more like land based and not so much water based. And so with our land bird monitoring program, we have 3 main ways that we do monitoring. So we use the ProAulis survey methods, which were developed by Cornell, more designed for the tropics. And so we train people on how to use the ProAulis survey techniques, and we kind of have these train the trainer workshops. So then they then leave those workshops and train other people how to identify birds, how to do these surveys. And then we offer small grants for people so they can actually implement that work. And then they can report back to us on those small grants. And then, of course, we have the bird banding program, which I mentioned. So where we're trying to teach people how to bird band, and teach people especially like how to ethically bird band and how to use bird banding as an important monitoring tool, but do it safely. So since bird banding is such an intensive technique and really takes several months of training, we have these workshops, and then we also send people to different internships that can be anywhere from 1 to 3 months. So then they actually get that experience and can come back to their island and start developing that program. And then we also have the opportunity to send trainers down to work with those people, and they can continue kind of building those bird banding programs. And then, of course, providing the tools for that. And then we have Motus. So then we've also been doing a lot with Motus, which is this really cool program started by Birds Canada that essentially acts as passive tracking for bird migration. And so they've been putting these towers up all across Canada and the US, and now they've been spreading into Latin America. And so we wanted, and then the Caribbean was formerly like a black hole. There were no towers really. There was like one tower that went up part of the year. So our goal was to change that. And so we now have, oh man, I hope I don't get this number wrong, but I think we have 7 or 8 towers up. We have towers in Puerto Rico. We have 2 in Puerto Rico with plans for 5 more. We're getting 3 up in the Bahamas that just got approved. We just got 1 up in Jamaica last year. We have plans for 2 in Dominican Republic. We have 1 in Barbados. And yeah, we have more plans to keep putting them up. And so the idea is that we put these little backpacks on the bird that are little radio tags. And so every time the bird pings one of these towers as it flies over, and the towers have about a 15-kilometer radius, that it's passive monitoring, so we can just see how that bird moves as it pings different towers on its way north, which is really cool. So not only have we been putting up more Motus towers in the Caribbean to kind of start to, because so many birds are crossing the Caribbean or using the Caribbean to overwinter, and it's just hasn't been fully studied yet. So not only do we want to fully understand that, but then we also want to tag birds in the Caribbean and then see where they go. So last year we tagged 1 prairie warbler, so we're hoping to tag 9 more this year, and then we tagged 6 Swainson's warblers in Jamaica. So yeah, and we're trying, and it was cool too because we saw the bird that we tagged, the prairie warbler in Puerto Rico. It was pinging that Motus tower every day, so we knew that it was still there, still overwintering, and then it was like late April, boom, it was gone. So it's really cool because it's definitely technology that works. And you don't have to recatch the birds, so it's really all passive monitoring. You just have to hope that they ping some of those towers on their way north.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, oh gosh, I have so many questions too, so I'm not gonna go all through all of them. But I guess I have a couple. So I am obviously not really a bird person, I'm a reptile and fish person, so probably worst of the worst. But I was hoping you could maybe explain a little bit more, especially for our audience who are watching are not as familiar with birding and bird banding. If you could explain a little bit more about like the importance of bird banding, what are you doing? You said you're doing, like backpacks, satellite tags. I did that with my turtles too, which was kind of interesting.
Cool.
Do you guys do like home ranges, things like that? If you could just kind of give us a little bit more of an insight of like what bird banding is, the importance of that, things like that.
Oh yeah, totally. So bird banding is really cool because it's this technique used where essentially you catch birds, oftentimes usually mist nets, and then you put a band on their leg. And so one of the things that that we really wanted to do is because in the Caribbean, so many people were just buying their bands from different sources, so there was no really standardization. Because for instance, in the US and Canada, they have, and in the UK and in a lot of places in Europe, they have like standardized banding schemas. So essentially, the government distributes bands to you, and you have you receive different band numbers, and then you can report those at the end of the year. So you can say like, I banded band number 1, 2, 3, 4. I gave that bird, like that band, to a black-throated blue warbler, for instance. And so the bands are all, each band has a unique number and it has a way to report it. So even somebody who's not a bird bander can see a website and then go to that website and report that band, which is really cool. And so what we wanted to do is kind of create that system for the Caribbean. And so I went through and I like Googled all these different, I like checked a bunch of domains, and so we ended up getting bcbnd.org. So we're like just about to launch it, but if you go to that website, you will be able to report any of our bands that you find. And so then we are essentially acting is similar to the bird banding lab in the US, where now we have all these different kind of standardized numbers, and so each bird will get a unique identification number that acts kind of like a passport or an ID number, so it will always identify that individual bird, which is really cool. But what's really cool about bird banding is not only are you tagging these birds, but while you have them in the hand, you're able to get a lot of really cool information about them that you wouldn't get just from just kind of observing them or doing a general census. So you can actually look at breeding conditions. So you can see if they have what's called a brood patch, which is how they kind of lose feathers on their breasts to incubate their eggs and brood young. You can also see this like swollen cloaca that males will get oftentimes when they're in breeding condition. So you can use that to assess kind of breeding phenology, and if birds have active nests, especially for resident birds where we still don't fully understand some of their breeding phenology depending on where they are in the tropics. And then we can also look at molt, so we can look at overall body conditions, so we can actually look at bird fat deposits, because birds have this fairly translucent skin. So we can actually see them store their fat deposits below the skin, but above the muscle. And which is really cool, especially with migratory birds. And if you think about migratory birds in the Caribbean that are crossing these large spans of water, we're actually able to see, like, are they getting the resources they need to fuel up and then make these kind of amazing journeys over water. And then we can also look at molt. So when birds molt is the process of replacing feathers, and oftentimes they do this in a way that allows us to age them. And oftentimes when we see birds molting, it's another energetically expensive life event. So it also shows us that they typically are in a more resource-rich area if they're actively molting. And then, of course, kind of going along with the molt is aging and sexing. So we can get a good sense of demography. And so we can start to, especially with migratory birds, we can see, okay, like, are we seeing males versus females leave sooner? Are we seeing males versus females overwinter or take different migratory routes? And then, of course, we can start to actually look at the demography of resident populations and see how different resident populations are doing, look at kind of recruitment, dispersal, how are young birds surviving? So yeah, you get this really awesome sense of phenology, demography, survivorship, and all of that, which is kind of like having a bird in your hand for 2 minutes, which is really cool. So it's kind of one of the really special things about bird banding that kind of gives us this awesome insight into the populations of birds, which is really cool. And then with the tagging too, what's cool is, so then when we kind of want to look even further into the populations and even look at kind of like individuals, we can put these tags on. And oftentimes with Motus, that's looking more at migration. So we're just kind of seeing like what different routes birds are taking. I've been involved with a few different Motus projects. We did one in Costa Rica, which was really cool because we actually tagged some birds in Montana, and then we got them. They pinged at different towers in Costa Rica, and then I actually went down to Costa Rica last winter and tagged some more thrushes, one of which pinged its way back north and now is back overwintering in Costa Rica. So it's just
cool.
Which is really cool. So I actually feel like a bit of a migratory bird myself sometimes, which is really neat.
Yes, I totally relate to that. I always call myself a ectotherm because I'm a reptile by heart. So I feel that. Yeah, that is so cool.
Yeah, so it's really cool. There's like all these different questions that we can answer just using bird banding and tagging. Yeah, that's really neat.
Yeah, thanks, Holly.
Which thrush, Holly? Was that? Just curious.
Oh, that was Swainson's thrush.
I'll see, they're everywhere. We get them down here all the time as well. We get so many down here, even all the way down in the southeastern part of Peru. It's crazy, eh? Yeah, love it.
Wait,
super cool.
That's so cool, man! You guys need like a Motus tower down there. But it's
we
been
can
this
talk
really
about
cool
that.
project.
I would love that. We get eastern wood pewee, eastern kingbird, Swainson's thrush. I got yellow green vireo today. Anyways, that's literally this morning, you guys. So we can talk about that. But I'd love to put a Motus network up here someday. Absolutely, I'd love to. But we can talk about that. That's it'll take a while. Yeah, but I'd love to do that. Yeah. I wanted to ask you too. So obviously, as you may know, and I think maybe a lot of people from North America know, a lot of birds that are migrating. Yeah, as you mentioned, passing through the Caribbean. It's a hugely important migratory stopover region. Depends on the species, the country, etc. But yeah, it's really important. And for some species, literally, when they arrive, they're on the edge of death. If they don't have this island to survive, it's stopping, and they won't survive. So, there's so much conservation work done often in North America to protect these species, and sometimes even in South America where they might finish sometimes. But maybe there's less attention given sometimes to preserving habitat in these Caribbean countries. With your experience, can you sort of speak to, I guess, the overview of how that conservation is working? I know it's complicated, it's many countries, but what's your thoughts on the state of conservation in those countries and as it relates to birds and their health and migration?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. I think it's hard to answer it for the Caribbean in general, just because it's a big area. But what is really fascinating is there are some populations of birds that almost their entire population will winter on an island in the Caribbean. So, for instance, Kirtland's warblers like almost exclusively winter in like a small section of the Bahamas, or bicknose thrush. They winter almost exclusively in Dominican Republic. And so I think some birds like that, where these kind of almost the entire, like if you think about it, right, it's crazy. Like the entire population of a bird is overwintering on a Caribbean island. Those species have for sure been prioritized and definitely given a lot of conservation concern, a lot of conservation action. But I think that there's still And I mean, I think this is generally, you can see this in a lot of places in Latin America. There's a lot more that we still need to learn, and there's a lot more we still need to conserve. What's fascinating, and actually when we were writing this grant and starting this project, I did a lot of my work in the mountains of the Dominican Republic, kind of like in the direct center of the country, in an area called Jarabacoa. And when I was working there, I was just kind of working with a lot of local farm owners, and my ex and I were both just kind of like, we were going to different farm owners, and we worked, I think, around like 9 to 12 different farms, looking at different birds. And there were so many migratory birds there, and it was just an area that was totally overlooked. Like, I think sometimes a lot of people tend to think of, okay, like, we need to really work on these national parks, we need to work in these protected areas, but there's some of these farms that have these, like, they are, of course, like deforested, and where we were working, there was a lot of cattle, so of course it's a lot of deforestation, but they keep all their riparian corridors intact, which is fascinating. And so you get these like riparian corridors, and then you get these also live fence trees, where in Latin America, a lot of times they'll kind of put these posts in the ground that are living, that are like live sticks, and then they'll like grow into trees. So you would have these small corridors, and you just have a ton of different birds there. And one property owner in particular, he was actually really interested in conserving a lot more of his property. And I still work with him. He's an awesome guy, and he's calling his property La Serena, like the Serene. And we went banding there last winter, and I brought up one of my Dominican colleagues, Hector, and we caught like worm-eating warbler, and he was like, I've never even seen this in the country, and he's like a really good birder. So I think there's some of these areas that are just like, and I think the Dominican Republic is also chronically underbirded, just because you don't have a really strong ornithological community or a really strong birder community there, which a lot of people are working to change. But I think there's just like areas like that. I think you just start working in these areas that are kind of like, you know, like secondary growth, or like, you know, like disturbed habitat, but they're still really good for migrants. And what was cool is I saw that in Costa Rica too. Like, I spent COVID in Costa Rica, and so every day I would like go for a walk, and like I had this, like, my local birding patch was just this road I found, which was really cool. And I just walked this road every day. But what was really cool is it was just kind of like this old coffee farm and an old cattle farm, and it was like filled, like I would get 50 species of birds every day, and I would see like chestnut-sided warblers and Blackburnian warblers. Like I would get like 10 to 11 species of warbler every day,
Wow.
which was so cool. And especially during migration, even more so. So I think sometimes like these areas that are fragmented habitat that we don't often think about as being like a big priority, they could be so important for a lot of these migratory birds. So I think that would be my biggest, like, I would love to see more work done with this kind of fragmented habitat in a lot of areas in the Caribbean and Latin America.
Yeah. Oh, well, Holly, thank you so much. That was an amazing, amazing piece of information. That was great. Almost stories within one. So many good things there.
Yeah, thank you.
What we're all interested to hear about is what's the crazy story, what's happened in your field story life, and story, and show us a little insight into your life.
Yeah, I was actually, so I have a couple I was thinking about that are pretty crazy. One of which that I was thinking about actually happened in the Caribbean. And it happened where I was doing my work in the Dominican Republic. So like I mentioned, I kind of got my start in the Dominican Republic working for a PhD student who was doing his work on the Hispaniolan woodpecker. And so, of course, that work included a lot of climbing trees, looking in cavities. And so it was pretty intense work, and I got really good at tree climbing, which was a pretty cool skill.
Awesome.
And I honestly just fell in love with Dominican Republic. I fell in love with the neotropics. And I actually met my former partner there too. And so we both ended up really wanting to come back, and we both wanted to do our graduate work there. So we both ended up starting our graduate projects. And I think this was one of the first years of his PhD, and I hadn't quite started my master's yet, but I was just kind of down there, like testing out sites and seeing if the questions I had about the toadies were feasible. And so as it kind of worked out, this guy, Josh, that we had worked for before, Josh LaPergola, we were able to work on his, or just stay with him in like kind of had like this big field house of 3 different projects, which was kind of cool. But as it turned out, and so Josh is working at Cornell doing his PhD on the Hispaniola woodpecker. And one day we were out, we were just kind of all at the field house, and we had rented a car because, as I mentioned, we wanted to do a lot of our work kind of around different farms. And while that area you can walk around, if you want to start looking at a lot of different areas, you really have to get a car. And so we ended up renting a car. And then we got this call from some of Josh's field assistants. So he had a whole field crew. And they called us and they were like, Josh just fell out of a tree. And we were like, what the fuck? Like, no way. He didn't like actually fall out of the tree. And they're like, no, yeah, like you need to come now. And at the time, man, I think he like his wife was I don't think his wife was there, but like I think she she was she wasn't pregnant at the time, but we ended up like I think we just like jumped in the car and we drove over. Unfortunately, it wasn't that far, but it was like a 5-minute drive, but it was definitely like out in the middle of a cattle pasture, because in Dominican Republic, what you get is you get this palm savanna habitat, because the royal palms are protected as, I think, the national tree, so they can't cut them down. And so you get this kind of like deforested cattle habitat with all these little palm trees, which works out fantastically for the Hispaniola woodpecker and for the national bird, the palm chat. So the palm chats will nest in the top of the tree and the woodpeckers will nest on the side of the tree. And so, but then you have this kind of like totally open habitat. And so what had happened is Josh had been climbing a dead palm tree, and then he had set his top line incorrectly to belay down and had fallen about 45 feet, or about
Oh my God.
meters.
Jesus
Yeah.
Christ.
Yeah, and we were like, holy shit, like we were both kind of like really just like we couldn't believe that he was okay, first of all. He could still kind of move.
Yeah.
And so what was crazy, and this is actually I use this story as like you should always have a first aid plan anytime you go to a remote or not remote field setting. And what was crazy about this was that we had no idea what to do. We didn't know what the emergency numbers were. We tried calling 911 and it went to voicemail, which I think was one of the weirdest things. And so we were like, what do we do? And we asked him, and Josh had no emergency plan. And so we ended up in the Dominican Republic. They have these like little convenience stores called colmados. And what was fortunate is because it was a small community we were working in, like everyone knew who Josh was. They're like, oh, the crazy gringo who like climbs trees looking for woodpeckers. Like everyone knew who he was. Mm-hmm. And so then we ended up going to the colmado. Like we did, like at this point, I think I was like, we kept the car there because we were like, well, we need to keep the car. And I just ran like a mile to the colmado. I was like, listen, like Josh just fell out of a tree, like the woodpecker guy. And they were like, oh my God. And we were like, what do we do? Like we don't know what to do. Like we don't know any like emergency numbers or anything. And they were like, okay, well, like let us get like the medic. And they're actually like very fortunately happened to be this guy who is Dominican Canadian and who spoke English very fluently and was in town at the time, like grew up in this small town. And he was so like they got him and he rushed out. And then he was like, okay, here's what you have to do. Like the way things work is that if you call for an ambulance that's like the public health, they're like, it'll never arrive. Like you have to have numbers for private ambulances. And he's like, these are the numbers for private ambulances. You have to call them. And so then we were like calling all these private ambulances, but we had to get him like out of this field too. So like this medic rushes out and he's like checking on Josh, making sure he's okay. And he had broken his wrist. And he also, it turns out he got, I'll get to that part in a second, but yeah, and he was kind of just like laying in this field. Of course, his field assistants were traumatized. They were just like sitting there crying as we're like, it's okay, we're going to figure this out. And then, this medic is checking on him, making sure he's okay, but Josh is kind of a bigger dude. So they like needed kind of a few people to carry him out. And I'm a fairly small person, so I wasn't much help. And so, in the most like tropical way possible, they ended up kind of like splinting his wrist for the time being with like a palm leaf, like a palm leaf on the ground. Oh, right. And then they ended up like getting a stretcher and like 4 guys carried him out, and we were able to call one of these private ambulances and then get him in, like we like all kind of like, they all kind of like 4 dudes, I think, like, carried him out into this ambulance. And then the ambulance had come down this like dirt bumpy road somehow. And the road was like a mess at the time too. It was just like half the time it was always washed out and you always had to like gun it, but then like honk on your way up to like make sure you didn't hit anyone. Like it's just like one of those roads. And then, so they got him in the ambulance somehow. That ambulance arrived, and then the ambulance drives out, and they're like, yeah, like follow the ambulance. And what's crazy too is in the Dominican Republic, the ambulances don't really have sirens. They just kind of have flashing lights, and then you just put your hazards on and follow the ambulance. And but what's crazy is then like nobody moves out of the way. And I guess it's Dominican Republic, so everyone just kind of like drives like crazy anyway. So it was just this like very chaotic trip to so we went to a hospital in Jarabacoa, and then they were like, yeah, like we can't do anything here, like you have to go down to La Vega. So La Vega is kind of a city further down the, like you go back kind of down the mountain, and it's in between the two main cities of Santo Domingo and Santiago. So we drove down to La Vega, and La Vega's kind of it's just kind of an ugly city. It's just kind of like hot, super humid, not much going on there, honestly. And then we get to the hospital, and they ended up, like doing some x-rays, and it turned out, so he had broken his wrist, and he had broken a lot of this, like I think it's called the processes, the sides of the vertebrae had broken. Wow. He broke a lot of his ribs, and he fractured his pelvis in 2 places, and his intestines also ruptured, but fortunately, because he was wearing the climbing harness, it had all kind of like held things into place. And so... Wow. Yeah, it was. So he ended up having an emergency surgery, and I do think his wife was in town at the time, because I remember her being there and her helping us out a lot. And it was just kind of crazy. And then a lot of his family all flew down, and so we were like helping receive his family, and we were all at the hospital for about a week, and we took his field assistants down to visit, because a couple of them had just seen him in this really horrible state, right? And they hadn't gotten to see him kind of like looking a little better, as we like took everyone down. And it was just kind of this crazy situation. And then because he was with Cornell, he had really good health insurance. And then he got airlifted back to the U.S. And what was crazy is they kind of, and this has happened at like another time I noticed when another friend of mine had to get stitches in the DR. They used a lot of techniques that are kind of a little outdated, like maybe from like 20 years ago. And so it was kind of similar when this guy had surgery. Some of the techniques they used saved his life, but were a little outdated. So they ended up having to redo a lot of things. And I think he has like 2 pins in his hips. But what's amazing is like I saw him a year later at a conference, and he was like walking. And then he went back the next year, and every single person in that town was like, please do not climb any more trees. Like, we do not want to see you. And he was like, well, I got to finish my PhD. And he like went and climbed more trees again and defeated that fear, like, which was just incredible. So, and then it was just kind of wild, because all these field assistants had signed up for like a 6-month field season. This happened about like 2 months in, maybe a month in. And so they were like, what do? We were like, I don't know. You can fly home. You can hang out. Like, and I think they all ended up finding other field jobs and leaving. But I think it was definitely really wild. Like it was, and it always, to me, like the biggest takeaway I got from that was that, one, how important it is to be connected with local communities, because when you need them, they will 100%, like that whole community showed up for him. And they didn't even really, like, they weren't really a big fan of him doing that woodpecker work, but he still was a part of that community, and they showed up. And 2, always have an emergency plan and no emergency numbers wherever you go. Because calling 911 and going to voicemail is awful.
Yeah, and also make sure that not more than one person knows that emergency plan too, because if the person who knows it is incapacitated, you're kind of screwed. So wow, that's crazy. Well, that was fantastic. Go ahead, Nick.
I was just saying, imagine your ruptured intestines being held together by a rope.
My whole body kind of just shivered when you were talking about that. I go like hunting too, and we go up in, the tree stands and everything. And it's like one of my biggest fears, even though I go hunting, I like the height. And I just think about that. I'm glad he's okay.
Yeah. No, I am too. And he like finished his PhD, and he's doing great. But it's just like one of those crazy, like, holy crap, I can't believe, like, and it was honestly so fortunate that me and my ex were there, because like we had a car, we were able to kind of like help out, and and he spoke Spanish way better than I did at the time, so it all kind of like really worked out.
Amazing story.
Lucky.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I have a feeling that we could probably keep this going for an hour based on all the cool information that I know you have and all the great stories. But I think what we should do is end this one, and then maybe in advance, in months or whatever, a year, assuming that we, continue doing this podcast for the 13 viewers who are going to watch it. Maybe we'll get you on again in the future to talk about other things and tell other stories, because I feel like it's a treasure trove of endless information and stories with your life. So yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I would love that. All I'll say is that the other story I was debating telling is I like to call the zombie sloth story. So I'm just gonna dangle that for next time.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll get you on again. We'll get you on again, then, for sure. That's great. Cool.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
All right. Well,
thank you very much. Really enjoyed
yeah,
that.
I guess we'll sign off for now then. And yeah, thanks a lot for taking a little bit of your Sunday off to speak to us and out of your busy schedule. And yeah, I have a suspicion we'll be in contact again for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That was great. I really enjoyed it.
I'm excited.
Thank you so much for having me on. This is really fun.
Perfect.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Take care. Thanks, Holly. Ciao.
That was awesome. What a great interview. And we've learned so much from Holly. I was just blown away with her crazy field story of this poor guy just falling out of the tree. Oh, it's horrible. I mean, just to be out in the middle of nowhere and not really have the proper medical attention is kind of frightening if you think about it.
Yeah,
it's mental.
For sure.
It's actually insane. So I think for me as well, learning about the Motus towers and all the sort of data collection that's going on in the Caribbean and the advancements in the technology, I knew a little bit from Chris and learning from him in the Amazon, but there's just that sort of variety of processes in data collection that it's really growing, and for Holly to be able to expand on that information was really, really epic, and I really enjoyed it. You can probably tell.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, it's great. I mean, there's so many there's so many potential research opportunities across the world, and certainly the neotropics. And I know for me, one of the things that keeps me interested and excited to work, in this region here in Peru and other parts of the neotropics is just how many questions there still are to be answered out there. We've just sort of scratched the surface, right? And like you said, Nick, is a great point. I mean, technology is such a amazing tool for to help us learn more about wildlife across the whole world, and certainly in tropical areas that are understudied. So yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, I think we mentioned it in the interview, guys, but I mean, I think that won't be the last time that we have her on, because she was a fantastic
She's
guest.
phenomenal.
And I guess the other thing we kind of forgot in the intro, because we were just too busy making fun of Kella's hangover, was the fact that I guess as this is airing, it's January 2nd, so everybody hopefully had a really safe and awesome New Year's celebration. And I guess I just say to both of you and all of the viewers who are watching that I hope everybody has a really good, safe, awesome 2024 as well.
Yeah, drink a lot of water, everyone.
I think we can already tell our viewers, a lot of them probably need to drink a lot of water on this day, January 2nd. So.
And especially in the field, you just don't know what's happening. I need to drink a lot of water. No, what a great interview. I hope everyone, had a great, happy New Year's and just got to spend time with friends, family, or just, out in the field maybe. Maybe they got to enjoy a good field day for New Year's, which is exciting. So, it was awesome.
Yeah, no, really enjoyed this one. A great episode. A good way to kick off the new year. I think we've got a lot of exciting plans coming up this year. We're going to withhold some of those, and then I think we're just going to keep on doing what we're doing. Really enjoying it. It's going really well. So.
Yeah, sounds good, guys. Okay, well, We'll see you next week then, I guess.
Yeah, see y'all next week.
Bye.
Okay.